Welcome to the Explainer. Have you ever really stopped to think about how an eternal, unchanging God can be involved in our messy, moment-to-moment lives? How can he be both outside of time and somehow present within it? Well, today we're going to explore that exact paradox, and we'll use a really powerful framework from classical theology to help make sense of it all. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to really define the problem, what we're calling the timeless paradox. Then, we'll introduce the big idea that kind of unlocks everything, the eternal decree. From there, we'll see how this plays out in actual history, what it means for God's presence in our lives, and then, we'll tie it all together at the end.
All right, let's jump right in. First up, we need to put the central problem into really sharp focus.
So here it is. This is the core tension. On the one hand, you've got this idea of an eternal, completely unchanging God. But on the other hand, there's us, living in a world that is, by definition, always changing. So how do those two things meet? How can God genuinely be with you, say, in a moment of prayer or pain, if he himself isn't affected by the flow of time? This is the question that really drives everything else we're going to talk about. So, how do we even begin to solve this puzzle? Well, theologians have offered a really powerful solution, and it's basically built on two core ideas. Let's take a look at the first one. The first idea is what's called God's simple nature, or as you see here, 神圣单纯性. Now, simple in this context doesn't mean easy to understand. Not at all. It means God isn't made of different parts. He's one, whole, unified being. There are no shifting thoughts, no changing moods, none of that within his very nature. He just is.
And that idea of a simple, unchanging nature leads directly to this next key concept, the eternal decree, or 永恒的预旨. Think about it. If God is truly unchanging, then his plan can't be a bunch of separate decisions made over time, right? It has to be one single, unified, timeless act of his will that holds everything all at once, from the first moment of creation to the very end of time.
Yeah, from God's eternal perspective, there's no before and after. This quote puts it perfectly. To him, creation, the fall, and our redemption aren't a sequence of events. They are all comprehended simultaneously, all part of one single, complete act of his will.
It's a mind-bending idea for sure.
Okay, so that's the eternal perspective, but what does that mean for us? How does this one single, all-at-once plan actually intersect with our timeline, with history as we live and breathe it? That's what we're digging into next. Now this, right here, is probably the most important distinction in this entire explainer. We absolutely have to separate God's one eternal plan, the decree, from the way that plan unfolds over time in our world, what we're calling its historical execution. Think of them as two sides of the same coin, but they are definitely not the same thing. Here's a pretty simple way to break it down. The eternal decree is a single, unchanging act that exists entirely within God. It's his eternal thought. The historical execution, on the other hand, is how we, as creatures living inside of time, experience that single act. We see it as a sequence of events. So the plan itself is eternal, but its unfolding is historical, and it's done for our sake. And why does this distinction matter so much? Well, because if we mush them together, we risk what some have called a collapse into history. And that's a huge theological mistake where we start to imagine God as being trapped in time, just like us, reacting to things, changing his mind. This distinction is what protects God's transcendent, unchanging nature. Okay, but this brings up a really obvious and, frankly, tough question. If God's plan is already set, if it's infallibly certain, does that mean history is just some pre-written script? Does it make an event like the resurrection any less real? Are we all just puppets on a stage? The answer is a hard no, not at all. The sources are really clear on this. History is the real theater where this whole plan unfolds. Redemption wasn't just an idea floating around in eternity. It was something that was accomplished once for all, right here in our timeline. It had to happen in history for it to be a real historical redemption for people who actually live in history. So we've kind of laid out the what and the how. But what about the so what? Let's explore what this all means on a personal level, for how God actually relates to us. This short phrase really captures the beautiful answer to our big puzzle: personal presence without change. What it means is that God can be fully and truly present with us in our time without being limited by our time. He is right there with us, yet he remains completely eternal.
And thinking this way gives us at least three really powerful assurances. First, it means that redemption was never an accident or a plan B. It was eternally purposed from the very beginning. Second, it shows that God acts freely, out of his own will, not just reacting to what we do. And third, it protects the very nature of who God is, allowing for real, meaningful history without making God a victim of it.
This leads us, of course, to maybe the most personal question of all, prayer. I mean, if the entire plan is already set, does my prayer even matter? Does it actually do anything? Or am I just kind of talking to myself here?
And the answer from this perspective is a resounding yes. Prayer is absolutely real. Here's why. Your prayer and God's response to it aren't things that happen outside the plan, forcing it to change. No, they're already woven into the single eternal decree. It's a genuine interaction because God eternally decided to work through your prayers as part of the historical unfolding of his plan.
All right, let's bring this all home. In our last section here, we're just going to quickly review the core logic and then reflect on what it all really means.
If you only remember one thing from all this, let it be this incredible balance. This whole theological framework we've been talking about, it allows for a redemption that is a concrete, real event in our history, while at the same time ensuring that its source, God himself, remains eternal, unchanging, and totally outside the limits of time.
So here's the entire argument in just 3 simple steps. See, it all starts with God's unchanging, simple nature. That logically leads to his single, timeless, eternal decree. And then that decree is what we experience as historical execution. Each step just flows right from the one before it.
So, here's a little challenge for you. Maybe hit pause for a second and just try to explain, in your own words, the difference between the eternal decree and its historical execution. If you could do that, you've totally mastered the core idea of this whole explainer.
And we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If you really believe in an unchanging God with an infallibly certain plan, how does that change things on the ground? How might it reshape your view of suffering? Or maybe deepen your sense of hope when things feel totally chaotic and uncertain? That right there is the real takeaway. Thanks for exploring this with us.